The fluorescent lights of Westbridge Academy's cafeteria cast harsh shadows across the polished marble floors as 17-year-old Maya Chen sat alone at a corner table, her physics textbook propped open beside her half-eaten sandwich. The quiet hum of privileged conversations filled the air around her, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter from the popular tables near the windows. Maya had learned to find solace in these moments of solitude, her dark eyes scanning the complex equations that made more sense to her than the social hierarchies that governed her daily existence. She tucked a strand of her natural hair behind her ear, adjusting the simple gold studs her grandmother had given her for her 16th birthday. Everything about Maya was understated: her worn but clean sneakers, her thrift store cardigan over the mandatory white polo, the way she kept her head down and her voice soft. To most of her classmates at this elite private school, she was invisible. To others, she was a target. The first sign of trouble came as a shadow fell across her textbook. Maya looked up to see 3 figures approaching her table, their designer uniforms perfectly pressed, their smiles sharp as broken glass. At the center stood Victoria Whitman, whose platinum blonde hair caught the light like a halo of privilege. To her right, James Caldwell adjusted his varsity jacket with the practiced ease of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. On the left, Madison Pierce clutched her designer handbag like a weapon, her pale blue eyes scanning Maya with undisguised disdain. "Well, well," Victoria said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from generations of wealth and influence. "Look what we have here. The scholarship girl thinks she can just sit wherever she wants." Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she kept her eyes on her book. "I'm not bothering anyone." "Actually, you are," James interjected, his voice carrying the casual cruelty of someone who had never faced real consequences. "This section is reserved for students whose families actually contribute to this school." The cafeteria around them continued its normal rhythm, but Maya could feel the weight of watching eyes. Some students had their phones out, recording what they sensed might become entertainment. Others looked away, grateful it wasn't them in the crosshairs. "My tuition is paid just like everyone else's," Maya said quietly, finally looking up to meet Victoria's gaze. There was something in her dark eyes, a steadiness that seemed to unsettle the other girl. Madison stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more menacing than shouting. "Charity cases don't get to have opinions, Maya. Maybe you should remember that." Before Maya could respond, Victoria reached out and casually knocked over Maya's water bottle, sending liquid cascading across the table and soaking into her textbook. The pages curled and warped as Maya scrambled to save what she could, her movements quick and controlled despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "Oops," Victoria said with mock innocence, her friends laughing as if it were the funniest thing they'd ever witnessed. "How clumsy of me." Maya stood slowly, water dripping from her ruined textbook. For a moment, something flickered in her posture. A subtle shift in balance, a tension in her shoulders that spoke of coiled strength. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by the careful composure she'd cultivated over years of navigating hostile environments. "I need to get to class," Maya said, gathering her damaged belongings with steady hands. "Of course you do," James said, stepping aside with exaggerated courtesy. "Wouldn't want the scholarship girl to be late." As Maya walked away, she could hear their laughter following her, mixing with the whispered conversations of students who had witnessed the encounter. Some looked sympathetic, others entertained, but none intervened. This was the way things worked at Westbridge Academy. Those with power exercised it, and those without learned to endure. Maya pushed through the cafeteria doors and headed toward the bathroom, her wet textbook clutched against her chest. In the mirror, she saw what everyone else saw: a quiet girl who seemed to accept whatever was thrown at her. But Maya knew something they didn't. The stillness they mistook for weakness was actually the calm of someone who had spent years learning to control both her body and her emotions. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. 3 years ago, Maya's life had been different. She'd lived in a working-class neighborhood where her mother, Dr. Sarah Chen, worked double shifts at the community hospital. Maya had attended Jefferson High, where she'd been popular and confident, where her quick wit and natural leadership had earned her respect. But when her mother's research on healthcare disparities had caught the attention of the prestigious Westbridge Foundation, everything changed. The full scholarship to Westbridge Academy had been presented as an opportunity, a chance to attend one of the country's most elite schools, to open doors that had been closed to their family for generations. What the foundation hadn't mentioned was the price Maya would pay for walking through those doors. The transition had been jarring. At Jefferson High, Maya had been the student council president, captain of the debate team, and the kind of person teachers relied on to mentor struggling classmates. At Westbridge, she was an outsider whose very presence seemed to challenge the natural order of things. Her first week had been a crash course in unspoken rules. There were tables in the cafeteria where she wasn't welcome, social events where her presence was tolerated but not desired, and teachers who seemed surprised when she excelled academically. The message was clear. She was here by the grace of others, and she should be grateful for what she was given. Maya had tried to adapt, to find her place in this new world. She'd joined the academic clubs, volunteered for extra projects, and maintained the kind of perfect GPA that would make her mother proud. But nothing seemed to earn her genuine acceptance. To most of her classmates, she would always be the charity case, the girl who didn't belong. The harassment had started small. Whispered comments about her clothes, exclusion from group projects, the kind of microaggressions that were hard to report because they seemed so insignificant in isolation. But Maya recognized the pattern. She'd seen it before, in the self-defense classes she'd started taking at age 12. Her instructor, Master Kim, had been a Korean War veteran who'd opened his small dojo in Maya's old neighborhood. He'd taught her that predators always started with small tests, pushing boundaries to see how much their victims would tolerate. The techniques he'd taught her, Krav Maga mixed with traditional martial arts, were designed for real-world situations, for people who couldn't rely on size or strength alone. The goal isn't to fight, Master Kim had always said, his weathered hands demonstrating precise movements. The goal is to survive and protect what matters, but sometimes survival requires action. Maya had trained religiously for 5 years, earning her black belt just months before starting at Westbridge. The discipline had given her confidence, taught her to read body language and assess threats, but it had also taught her patience, the ability to endure until the right moment presented itself. Now, as she stood in the bathroom trying to salvage her textbook, Maya felt the familiar calm that came with preparation. She'd known this moment would come eventually. The question wasn't whether she could handle Victoria and her friends. It was whether she should. The bathroom door opened, and Maya looked up to see Zoe Martinez, one of the few students who'd ever shown her genuine kindness. Zoe was Latina, from a middle-class family that had sacrificed everything to send her to Westbridge. She understood better than most what it meant to be different in this environment. "Are you okay?" Zoe asked, her voice soft with concern. "I saw what happened in the cafeteria." Maya nodded, though her textbook was clearly ruined. "I'm fine. It's just water." "It's not just water and you know it," Zoe said, leaning against the sink. "This has been going on for months. Have you talked to anyone about it?" Maya almost laughed. "Talked to whom?" "The guidance counselor, whose office was decorated with photos of her playing tennis with parents from the school's most influential families. The principal who'd made it clear that Maya's presence at Westbridge was a privilege, not a right." "What would I say?" Maya asked. "That some students were rude to me? That I got my feelings hurt? That you're being systematically harassed?" Zoe corrected. "Maya, what they're doing isn't normal teenage behavior. It's targeted, it's cruel, and it's getting worse." Maya met her friend's eyes in the mirror. Zoe was right, of course. The incidents were escalating, becoming more public and more humiliating. Just last week, Victoria had accidentally spilled coffee on Maya's presentation poster during advanced placement history, ruining hours of work. The week before, James had started a rumor that Maya was cheating on her exams, forcing her to endure suspicious looks from teachers who'd previously respected her academic abilities. "I can handle it," Maya said quietly. "I know you can," Zoe replied, "but you shouldn't have to." The warning bell rang, signaling 5 minutes until the next period. Maya gathered her damaged belongings and headed for the door, but Zoe caught her arm. "Promise me you'll think about reporting this," Zoe said. "Or at least let me help. We could document everything, build a case. I'll think about it," Maya said, though they both knew she wouldn't. Maya had learned early that the world wasn't fair, that justice wasn't guaranteed, and that sometimes the only person you could count on was yourself. As she walked to her next class, Maya felt the familiar weight of isolation settle over her shoulders. But beneath it, something else was stirring. A quiet determination that had been building for months. She'd been patient, she'd been careful, and she'd tried to navigate this hostile environment with grace. But patience had its limits, and Maya was beginning to sense that hers were being tested. The afternoon brought advanced placement chemistry, one of Maya's favorite classes. She'd always been drawn to the precision of scientific formulas, the way elements combined and reacted according to predictable laws. Unlike the social dynamics of Westbridge Academy, chemistry made sense. She took her usual seat in the back row, pulling out her backup notebook and trying to focus on the lesson. But as Dr. Reynolds began explaining molecular bonds, Maya became aware of whispers behind her. She turned slightly and saw Victoria and Madison huddled together, their phones out, their expressions cruel with anticipation. "Ladies," Dr. Reynolds said sharply, "is there something you'd like to share with the class?" Victoria looked up with practiced innocence. "Not at all, Dr. Reynolds. We were just discussing the homework assignment." But Maya had caught a glimpse of Victoria's phone screen, and what she'd seen made her blood run cold. It was a photo of her from the cafeteria incident, water soaking her clothes, her expression one of quiet humiliation. The caption read, "Charity case can't even eat lunch without making a mess." Maya's hands clenched into fists under her desk, and for a moment she felt the coiled tension that Master Kim had taught her to recognize. It would be easy, so easy, to turn around and show Victoria exactly what she was capable of. But Maya had learned long ago that there was a difference between being able to do something and being willing to accept the consequences. At Westbridge Academy, the consequences for a scholarship student would be severe. One incident, one moment of losing control, and she'd be gone. Her mother's sacrifice would be wasted, her own future compromised. Victoria and her friends knew this, counted on it. They could push and torment and humiliate because they knew Maya couldn't push back. The class dragged on, punctuated by more whispers and stifled laughter. Maya forced herself to take notes, to participate when called upon, to maintain the facade of normalcy. But inside, she was calculating. Every movement, every gesture, every word was being catalogued and analyzed. She was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about her. It was about power, about maintaining a system that kept people like her in their place. When the bell rang, Maya gathered her belongings and headed for the door. But as she passed Victoria's desk, the other girl stuck out her foot, sending Maya stumbling forward. Her notebooks scattered across the floor, and she landed hard on her knees. The classroom erupted in laughter, but Maya barely heard it. As she knelt on the cold tile, gathering her scattered papers, she felt something shift inside her. The careful control she'd maintained for months was beginning to crack, and beneath it, something harder and more dangerous was starting to emerge. "Careful, Maya," Victoria said sweetly, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "These floors can be so slippery." Maya stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. When she turned to face Victoria, there was something in her eyes that made the other girl take an involuntary step back. "Thank you for the warning," Maya said quietly. "I'll be more careful next time." But as she walked away, both girls understood that the real warning had been delivered by Maya herself. The quiet girl they'd been tormenting wasn't as helpless as they'd believed, and the game they'd been playing was about to change in ways they couldn't imagine. If you're enjoying this story of courage and standing up to bullies, smash that like button and let me know in the comments what you would do in this situation. The next few weeks brought an escalation that even Maya hadn't anticipated. The cafeteria incident had been captured on multiple phones, and the video had spread through Westbridge's social media networks like wildfire. Maya found herself the subject of memes, cruel jokes, and a level of public humiliation that made her previous experiences seem minor by comparison. The harassment was no longer confined to school hours. Maya's social media accounts were flooded with anonymous messages, her personal information shared in group chats, her every move documented and criticized. She'd blocked dozens of accounts, but new ones appeared daily, each one finding creative ways to make her life miserable. Victoria and her friends had grown bolder, their attacks more public and more cruel. They'd started a campaign of psychological warfare designed to break Maya's spirit, to force her to withdraw from school or transfer back to her old district. What they didn't understand was that Maya had been forged in fires they couldn't imagine, that every assault only strengthened her resolve. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon in October. Maya was walking to her car after school, her backpack heavy with textbooks and her mind focused on the evening shift she'd picked up at the local community center. The parking lot was mostly empty, with only a few students lingering near their expensive cars. She'd almost reached her mother's old Honda when she heard the familiar sound of approaching footsteps. Maya turned to see Victoria, James, and Madison walking toward her, their expressions predatory and confident. But they weren't alone. 3 other students flanked them, forming a semicircle that blocked Maya's path to her car. "Going somewhere?" Victoria asked, her voice carrying the kind of casual menace that came from knowing she held all the power. Maya's hand tightened on her car keys, the metal warm against her palm. "I'm going home." "Not yet," James said, stepping closer. "We need to have a conversation about your attitude lately." Maya's training kicked in automatically, her body shifting into a more balanced stance, her eyes scanning for potential threats and escape routes. There were 6 of them, and 1 of her. But Maya had learned long ago that numbers didn't always determine the outcome of a confrontation. "I don't know what you mean," Maya said, keeping her voice steady. Madison laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, you know exactly what we mean. You've been getting uppity lately, Maya. Acting like you belong here." "I do belong here," Maya replied, and for the first time in months she didn't lower her eyes. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Maya saw Victoria's expression shift from casual cruelty to something harder and more dangerous. This was no longer about maintaining social hierarchies. It was about crushing any sign of resistance. "No," Victoria said quietly. "You don't. And it's time you remembered that." What happened next unfolded in slow motion. Victoria reached out to grab Maya's backpack, intending to dump its contents across the parking lot. But Maya had spent years learning to read body language, to anticipate attacks before they happened. As Victoria's hand moved forward, Maya's training took over. The response was instinctive and precise. Maya stepped to the side, her hand coming up to intercept Victoria's wrist. For a moment, the 2 girls stood frozen. Victoria's arm caught in Maya's grip, her eyes wide with surprise. "Let go of me," Victoria hissed. Maya released her immediately, but the damage was done. For a split second, Victoria and her friends had seen something they hadn't expected. Strength, skill, and a complete lack of fear. The quiet girl they'd been tormenting had revealed herself to be something else entirely. "What the hell was that?" James demanded, his voice uncertain for the first time. Maya didn't answer. She was too busy calculating distances, assessing threats, and preparing for what she knew was coming next. The mask had slipped, and there was no going back. The attack came from 3 directions at once. James lunged forward while Madison tried to grab Maya's hair from behind. One of the other students, a boy named Trevor, whose parents owned half the town, moved to block her escape route. But Maya was no longer the passive victim they'd grown accustomed to tormenting. Years of training had prepared her for exactly this moment, and her body moved with the fluid precision of someone who had spent countless hours perfecting techniques designed for survival. She ducked under James's clumsy grab, her elbow connecting with his solar plexus as she spun away from Madison's reaching hands. Trevor found himself facing not a frightened girl, but a skilled fighter whose movements were economical and devastatingly effective. The entire confrontation lasted less than 30 seconds. But when it was over, 3 of Maya's attackers were on the ground, nursing injuries that would require explanations their parents wouldn't want to hear. Maya stood in the center of the parking lot, breathing hard but unharmed, her backpack still clutched in her hand. Victoria and the remaining students stared at her with expressions of shock and growing fear. The girl they'd thought they understood had revealed herself to be something entirely different. Not a victim, but a predator who had been choosing not to fight. "You're crazy," Victoria whispered, backing away. "You're absolutely crazy." Maya met her eyes, and for the first time in months she smiled. "No," she said quietly. "I'm just tired of being patient." As the group scattered, some helping their injured friends, others pulling out phones to call for help, Maya calmly got into her car and drove away. She knew that everything had changed, that the consequences of this moment would ripple through her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But as she drove through the affluent streets of Westbridge, past the manicured lawns and expensive cars, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a sense of her own power. She'd tried to fit in, to be grateful for opportunities that came at the cost of her dignity. But there were some prices that were too high to pay, and Maya had finally reached her limit. The real war was just beginning, and for the first time since arriving at Westbridge Academy, Maya was ready to fight. The aftermath of the parking lot incident spread through Westbridge Academy like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone knew that Maya Chen, the quiet scholarship girl who usually kept her head down, had single-handedly taken on 6 of the school's most privileged students and emerged victorious. The story grew with each telling, transforming from a simple confrontation into an epic battle that had left several students requiring medical attention. Maya arrived at school to find a transformed landscape. Students who had previously ignored her now watched her with a mixture of fear and fascination. Teachers who had once seen her as a grateful recipient of charity now looked at her with suspicion. The careful balance she'd maintained for months had been shattered, replaced by something far more complex and dangerous. Victoria and her friends were nowhere to be seen during first period, but Maya could feel their presence like a storm gathering on the horizon. She'd wounded their pride, challenged their authority, and proven that the power they'd taken for granted wasn't as absolute as they'd believed. In their world, such challenges couldn't go unanswered. The first retaliation came during lunch. Maya was sitting at her usual table trying to focus on her calculus homework when she became aware of a commotion near the cafeteria entrance. Victoria had arrived with her arm in a sling, her face marked with what appeared to be a black eye, but was actually expertly applied makeup, designed to look like bruising. "Look what that psycho did to me," Victoria announced loudly, her voice carrying across the cafeteria. "I was just trying to have a normal conversation, and she attacked me like some kind of animal." Maya watched the performance with grudging admiration. Victoria was playing the victim perfectly, her designer clothes slightly disheveled, her usual confidence replaced by trembling vulnerability. Students gathered around her, offering sympathy and support, their expressions shifting from curiosity to outrage as they looked in Maya's direction. "She should be expelled," someone said loudly. "This is supposed to be a safe environment." "I heard she knows karate or something," another student added. "She could have killed someone." Maya remained seated, her expression calm despite the growing hostility around her. She'd expected this response, had prepared for it during the long night she'd spent considering her options. Victoria was doing exactly what Maya would have done in her position, controlling the narrative, framing the incident in terms that would generate maximum sympathy and minimum scrutiny. The cafeteria had divided into 2 camps. The majority surrounded Victoria, offering support and expressing shock at Maya's violent behavior. But a smaller group, mostly students who had also experienced bullying, who understood what it meant to be different at Westbridge, watched the performance with skeptical eyes. Zoe Martinez appeared at Maya's table, her expression troubled. "They're saying you hospitalized 3 people, she said quietly. "Is that true?" Maya looked up from her homework. "James has a bruised rib. Madison sprained her wrist. Trevor has a black eye. None of them required hospitalization." "But you did fight them?" "I defended myself." Zoe sat down across from her, lowering her voice. "Maya, what's going on? Yesterday you were telling me you could handle everything quietly, and today half the school is calling you dangerous." Maya set down her pencil and met her friend's eyes. "They cornered me in the parking lot, 6 against 1. What did you expect me to do?" "I expected you to report it," Zoe said. "To get help." To what?" Maya interrupted. "To go to the same administrators who've been ignoring their harassment for months? To trust a system that's designed to protect people like them?" The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Patterson, the school's disciplinary coordinator. He was a thin man in his 50s with graying hair and the kind of nervous energy that came from years of managing privileged teenagers and their even more privileged parents. "Miss Chen," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "I need you to come with me." Maya gathered her belongings, aware that every eye in the cafeteria was watching. As she followed Mr. Patterson through the halls, she could hear the whispers starting again, the speculation about what would happen next. By the time they reached the administrative offices, Maya had already calculated the most likely outcomes. The disciplinary hearing was exactly what Maya had expected. She sat in a sterile conference room, facing a panel of administrators who had already made their decision before she'd entered the room. Mr. Patterson read from a prepared statement detailing the incident in the parking lot, using language that made Maya sound like a dangerous criminal who had attacked innocent students without provocation. "This is a serious matter, Miss Chen," said Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the school's principal. She was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair and the kind of refined bearing that came from generations of privilege. Westbridge Academy has a zero-tolerance policy regarding violence. Maya listened to the charges against her, noting how the narrative had been carefully constructed to remove any mention of the months of harassment that had preceded the confrontation. In this version of events, Maya had simply snapped and attacked fellow students for no apparent reason. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Dr. Hartwell asked. Maya considered her options. She could tell the truth, describe the systematic harassment she'd endured, explain how she'd been cornered and threatened, but she knew it wouldn't matter. The system that had failed to protect her would now be used to punish her for protecting herself. "I acted in self-defense," Maya said quietly. "I was outnumbered and threatened. I used the minimum force necessary to protect myself." "Minimum force?" Mr. Patterson scoffed. "You sent 3 students to the hospital." "I sent 3 students to the nurse's office," Maya corrected, "with minor injuries that required basic first aid." Dr. Hartwell leaned forward, her expression stern. "Miss Chen, you need to understand the gravity of this situation. Your actions have created a hostile environment for other students. Parents are calling, demanding to know how we're going to ensure their children's safety." Maya almost laughed. The irony was staggering. She was being accused of creating a hostile environment after enduring months of systematic harassment. But she kept her expression neutral, knowing that any display of emotion would be used against her. "I understand the seriousness of the situation," Maya said, "but I also understand that I have the right to defend myself when attacked." The hearing continued for another hour, with Maya answering questions that were designed to trap her into admitting guilt. She navigated the interrogation carefully, sticking to the facts while avoiding any statements that could be construed as admissions of wrongdoing. Finally, Dr. Hartwell delivered the verdict. "Given the severity of this incident, we're suspending you for 1 week while we conduct a full investigation. During this time, you're to have no contact with other students and no presence on campus. We'll also be requiring you to undergo psychological evaluation before you can return to classes." Maya had expected the suspension, but the psychological evaluation was a new twist. It was designed to humiliate her, to suggest that her actions had been those of someone mentally unstable rather than someone pushed beyond her limits. "I understand," Maya said, rising from her chair. "Will the other students involved in this incident be receiving similar treatment?" Dr. Hartwell's expression hardened. "The other students were victims, Miss Chen. They won't be punished for being attacked." As Maya left the administrative offices, she felt the weight of institutional power pressing down on her. The system had revealed itself fully, not as a protector of justice, but as a mechanism for preserving existing power structures. Her suspension was meant to be a warning to other students who might consider challenging the established order. But Maya had learned something important during her time at Westbridge. She'd discovered that the power these people wielded was based on consensus, on the agreement of everyone involved to maintain the fiction that their authority was legitimate. When someone refused to play by their rules, when someone chose to fight back, the entire system became vulnerable. The week-long suspension felt like exile, but Maya used the time productively. She spent her days at the community center where she'd been volunteering, working with younger students who reminded her of who she used to be. She helped with homework, organized activities, and slowly began to process what had happened to her. It was during one of these sessions that she met Marcus Johnson, a man in his 60s who had been volunteering at the center for over a decade. Marcus was a retired teacher who had spent his career working in urban schools, helping students navigate systems that were often hostile to their success. "I heard about what happened at Westbridge," Marcus said one afternoon as they cleaned up after a tutoring session. "Word travels fast in this community." Maya looked up from the books she was organizing. "What did you hear?" "That a young woman finally stood up to bullies who thought they could torment her without consequences," Marcus replied. "That she showed them they were wrong." Maya was surprised by his straightforward support. Most adults she'd encountered had expressed concern about her violent behavior, suggesting that she should have found a better way to handle the situation. "You don't think I was wrong?" Maya asked. Marcus sat down across from her, his expression thoughtful. "I think you were put in an impossible situation and made the best choice available to you. But I also think you're about to face consequences that will test everything you believe about justice and fairness." Over the following days, Marcus became an unexpected mentor. He shared stories from his own experiences. describing how he'd navigated hostile environments and institutional racism throughout his career. Unlike the other adults in Maya's life, he didn't lecture her about finding peaceful solutions or working within the system. Instead, he helped her understand that sometimes the system itself was the problem. Power protects itself, Marcus explained during one of their conversations. When you challenged those students, you weren't just standing up to bullies. You were challenging an entire structure that depends on people like you accepting their place. Maya found herself opening up to Marcus in ways she hadn't with anyone else. She described the months of harassment, the isolation, the feeling of being trapped in a world that didn't want her there. Marcus listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. "What you need to understand," Marcus said, "is that this isn't really about you. It's about what you represent. Every time a student like you succeeds at a place like Westbridge, it challenges the narrative that these institutions are meritocracies. They need you to fail, to prove that the system works the way it's supposed to." "So what do I do?" Maya asked. "You survive," Marcus replied. "You document everything. You build alliances with people who understand what you're facing. And when the time comes, you fight back in ways they can't ignore or dismiss." Marcus had connections throughout the education system, relationships built over decades of advocacy work. He introduced Maya to lawyers who specialized in civil rights cases, journalists who covered educational inequality, and activists who had fought similar battles in other schools. "The key," Marcus explained, "is to make this bigger than just your individual situation. What's happening to you is part of a pattern, a systematic exclusion of students who don't fit the expected mold. If you can document that pattern, if you can show how institutional policies enable harassment, you can force real change." Maya began to see her situation differently. Instead of viewing herself as a victim of cruel teenagers, she started to understand that she was facing a system designed to maintain inequality. The harassment wasn't random. It was a feature, not a bug, of institutions that claimed to value diversity while actively punishing students who didn't conform to expectations. The psychological evaluation required for her return to school was conducted by Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a psychiatrist who specialized in adolescent behavior. Maya entered the appointment expecting another hostile interrogation, but Dr. Morrison surprised her with a different approach. "I've reviewed your file," Dr. Morrison said, settling into her chair. "You're an exceptional student who has never shown any signs of violent behavior." "What happened in that parking lot?" Maya found herself telling the truth, not the carefully edited version she'd presented to the disciplinary committee, but the full story of months of systematic harassment. Dr. Morrison listened without interruption, taking notes and asking occasional clarifying questions. "What you're describing is a pattern of targeted harassment," Dr. Morrison said when Maya finished. "Have you reported this to school officials?" "I tried," Maya replied, "but they said it was just normal teenage behavior." Dr. Morrison's expression hardened. "There's nothing normal about what you've described. This is systematic bullying designed to force you out of the school." The evaluation continued for 2 hours, with Dr. Morrison conducting a thorough assessment of Maya's mental state. At the end, she provided a written report that not only cleared Maya for return to school, but also documented the harassment she'd experienced. "I'm recommending that you be allowed to return to classes immediately," Dr. Morrison said. "I'm also recommending that the school conduct a full investigation into the harassment you've experienced." Maya felt a surge of hope. Finally, an adult in authority had listened to her story and taken it seriously. But Marcus's words echoed in her mind. Power protects itself. The system had shown her who it valued, and Maya wasn't naive enough to believe that one report would change everything. When Maya returned to Westbridge Academy, she found a school transformed by her absence. The narrative of her violent attack had solidified into accepted truth, with students and teachers treating her like a dangerous criminal who might snap at any moment. Victoria and her friends had used the week effectively, building sympathy and support while painting Maya as an unstable threat to campus safety. But Maya was no longer the same person who had left the school a week earlier. Her conversations with Marcus had given her perspective, and Dr. Morrison's support had provided validation. She understood now that this wasn't just about surviving until graduation. It was about fighting a system that would continue to harm students like her long after she was gone. The first test came during her return to chemistry class. Maya took her usual seat in the back row, aware of the whispers and stares that followed her movement. Victoria and Madison sat in the front, their heads together, their expressions smugly confident. Dr. Reynolds began the lesson, but Maya could feel the tension in the room. Everyone was waiting for something to happen, for the dangerous girl to prove their fears justified. Maya remained calm, taking notes and participating when called upon, but she was also watching and listening. Halfway through the class, Victoria raised her hand. "Dr. Reynolds, I'm not comfortable with the current seating arrangement. Could we please reorganize the classroom?" Dr. Reynolds looked confused. "Is there a problem with your seat, Victoria?" "It's not about my seat," Victoria replied, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. "It's about feeling safe in this learning environment." The implication was clear, and Maya felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Victoria was using her return to reinforce the narrative of Maya as a dangerous threat, someone whose mere presence made other students feel unsafe. Maya raised her hand. "Dr. Reynolds, I'd like to request a meeting with the guidance counselor to discuss the hostile environment I've been experiencing in this class." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Maya had turned Victoria's tactic against her, using the same language of safety and comfort to highlight the harassment she'd endured. Dr. Reynolds looked uncomfortable, clearly recognizing that she was caught in the middle of a conflict that went far beyond classroom management. "Perhaps we should all focus on chemistry," Dr. Reynolds said finally, but the damage was done. The battle lines had been drawn publicly, and both sides understood that this was about much more than seating arrangements. After class, Maya was approached by a student she didn't recognize, a sophomore named Alex Chen, no relation despite the shared surname. Alex was Asian American, with short black hair and the kind of intense focus that Maya recognized in herself. "I saw what happened in there," Alex said quietly. "Victoria's been doing this to other students too. Have you thought about documenting everything?" Maya studied the younger student, recognizing something familiar in her expression. "What do you mean?" "I mean building a case," Alex replied. "My older sister went through something similar at her private school. She documented everything, screenshots, witness statements, patterns of behavior. When she finally presented it all together, the school couldn't ignore it anymore. It was exactly what Marcus had suggested, but hearing it from a fellow student gave the idea new weight." Maya realized she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. There were other students who had noticed the patterns, who understood what was really happening. "Would you be willing to help?" Maya asked. Alex nodded immediately. "I've been waiting for someone to fight back. Victoria and her friends think they run this school, but they've made enemies. More than they realize." Over the next few days, Maya began to understand the true scope of what she was facing. With Alex's help, she started reaching out to other students who had experienced harassment, discrimination, or exclusion at Westbridge. What she discovered was a network of victims who had been suffering in silence, each believing they were alone in their experiences. There was Roberto Santos, a Latino student whose father worked as a janitor at the school, who had been subjected to constant jokes about his family's economic status. There was Aisha Patel, whose Muslim faith made her a target for Islamophobic comments disguised as curiosity about her religion. There was David Kim, a student with autism, whose social differences had made him a favorite target for cruel pranks. Each student had their own story, but the patterns were remarkably consistent. The harassment always started small, with comments that could be dismissed as jokes or misunderstandings. It escalated gradually, becoming more public and more humiliating. When students tried to report the behavior, they were told to toughen up or not take things so seriously. The message was clear: conform, endure, or leave. Maya began to document everything with the systematic approach that Marcus had taught her. She collected screenshots of social media harassment, recorded dates and witnesses for verbal incidents, and photographed physical evidence of vandalism or destruction of property. Alex proved to be invaluable in this process, using her technical skills to organize the information into a comprehensive database. "Look at this," Alex said one afternoon as they worked in the school library. She had created a timeline that showed the escalation of harassment incidents across multiple students over the past 2 years. "There's a pattern here. It's not random, it's systematic." Maya studied the data, recognizing the sophisticated nature of what they were facing. This wasn't just teenage cruelty. It was an organized campaign designed to maintain social hierarchies through intimidation and exclusion. "We need more than documentation," Maya said. "We need witnesses willing to speak on record." That proved to be the biggest challenge. Many of the affected students were afraid to come forward. knowing that speaking out would make them even bigger targets. The few who were willing to help insisted on anonymity, afraid that their parents would be fired from jobs or their families would face economic retaliation. Maya understood their fear, but she also knew that change required courage. She began meeting with students individually, not to pressure them, but to help them understand that their silence was enabling the system that oppressed them. "I know it's scary," Maya told Roberto during one of these conversations, "but they're counting on our fear. They want us to believe we're powerless." "But we are powerless," Roberto replied. "Their families own half this town. They can destroy us without even thinking about it. Only if we let them," Maya said. "Only if we keep playing by their rules." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Taylor Brooks, a white student from a middle-class family, approached Maya after witnessing a particularly cruel incident in the hallway. Victoria and Madison had cornered Aisha near her locker, making loud comments about terrorists and bombs, while pretending to search their backpacks for suspicious devices. "I recorded the whole thing," Taylor said, showing Maya her phone. "I'm tired of watching this happen and doing nothing." The video was damning. Clear evidence of harassment that couldn't be dismissed as misunderstanding or teenage drama. But more importantly, Taylor's willingness to come forward gave other students courage. If a white student from an established family was willing to speak out, perhaps the consequences wouldn't be as severe as they'd feared. This is about to get intense. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because stories like this one show us what real strength looks like. What's your prediction for how this ends? Drop it in the comments below. Within a week, Maya had collected testimony from 15 students, video evidence of multiple incidents, and a comprehensive analysis of harassment patterns at Westbridge Academy. But she knew that presenting this information to the school administration would be futile. They had already demonstrated their priorities during her disciplinary hearing. Instead, Maya followed Marcus's advice and reached out to external advocates. She contacted the regional office of the NAACP, the local chapter of the ACLU, and several journalists who specialized in education reporting. She also reached out to Dr. Morrison, the psychiatrist who had conducted her evaluation, knowing that her professional opinion would carry weight. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Civil rights lawyers saw clear patterns of institutional discrimination. Journalists recognized a story that would resonate with readers across the country. Advocates understood that Westbridge Academy represented a microcosm of problems that existed in elite institutions everywhere. "What you've documented here is a textbook case of hostile environment harassment," explained attorney Sarah Martinez, a civil rights lawyer who had agreed to take Maya's case pro bono. "The school's failure to address these incidents, combined with their punishment of you for defending yourself, establishes a clear pattern of institutional bias." Maya felt a surge of validation. For months, she'd been told that her experiences were normal, that she was overreacting, that she needed to be more grateful for the opportunities she'd been given. Now, professionals who specialized in these issues were confirming what she'd known all along. She was facing systematic discrimination enabled by institutional policies. But Maya also understood that legal action would take time, and she was running out of it. Her senior year was half over, and the harassment was escalating despite her documentation efforts. Victoria and her friends seemed to sense that Maya was building something, and they were working to discredit her before she could present her case. The attacks became more sophisticated and more vicious. Anonymous accounts flooded Maya's social media with threats and harassment. Rumors spread that she was planning another violent attack on innocent students. Her mother received calls at the hospital suggesting that Maya was unstable and dangerous. "They're trying to break you," Marcus observed during one of their meetings. "They know you're close to exposing them, so they're escalating the pressure." Maya nodded, feeling the weight of the campaign against her. But she'd also learned something important during her months at Westbridge. She was stronger than she'd known, more resilient than her tormentors had calculated. Every attack only strengthened her resolve. The final escalation came during the winter formal, Westbridge Academy's most important social event of the year. Maya hadn't planned to attend. She had no date, no friends in her class, and no desire to spend an evening surrounded by people who despised her. But Alex convinced her that her absence would be seen as weakness, a sign that she'd been successfully intimidated. "You have to show them you're not afraid," Alex argued. "If you hide, they win." Maya arrived at the formal alone, wearing a simple black dress that her mother had helped her choose. She looked elegant and confident, the though inside she was calculating distances and escape routes with the automatic awareness that months of harassment had trained into her. The ballroom was decorated in silver and gold, with hundreds of students dancing and socializing under crystal chandeliers. Maya found a quiet corner and tried to blend into the background, but she could feel eyes watching her, whispers following her movement. Victoria arrived fashionably late, wearing a designer gown that probably cost more than Maya's family spent on groceries in 6 months. She was surrounded by her usual entourage, plus several older students who had graduated the previous year but still maintained social connections at the school. Maya recognized the setup immediately. Victoria had brought reinforcements, older, stronger allies who weren't bound by the school's disciplinary policies. This wasn't going to be a simple confrontation between teenagers. This was going to be a systematic assault designed to humiliate Maya in front of the entire student body. The attack began subtly, with pointed comments about Maya's dress, her hair, her presence at an event where she didn't belong. Victoria and her friends circled Maya like predators, their voices just loud enough to attract attention from other students. "I can't believe they let her in here," Madison said loudly. "After what she did to us, she should be in juvenile detention, not at our formal." Maya remained calm, her training keeping her centered even as the circle of hostility tightened around her. She knew that any reaction would be used against her, that they were trying to provoke her into another violent outburst that would justify whatever they had planned. "Maybe we should call security," suggested one of the older graduates, a young man whose family owned several local businesses. "I mean, she's clearly unstable. What if she snaps again?" The crowd around them was growing, with students pulling out phones to record what they sensed would be memorable entertainment. Maya found herself in the center of a human amphitheater, surrounded by people who saw her humiliation as sport. But Maya was no longer the frightened girl who had arrived at Westbridge Academy 18 months earlier. She'd been tested and tempered by months of systematic harassment. She'd learned to control her fear, to channel her anger, and to see clearly even in the midst of chaos. "I'm not the one who's unstable," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "I'm not the one who thinks assault is entertainment." Victoria stepped closer, her face flushed with anger and alcohol. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you can come to our school, take our spots, and then attack us when we try to be friendly?" Maya almost laughed at the revision of history, but she kept her expression neutral. "Is that what you call friendly? Months of harassment, humiliation, and threats? We tried to help you fit in," Victoria insisted, playing to the crowd. "But you're just too aggressive, too angry. You don't understand how civilized people behave." The words were carefully chosen, loaded with racial coding that would resonate with their audience. Maya was being painted as the angry black girl, the violent outsider who couldn't appreciate the kindness of her social betters. But Maya had learned something from Marcus about turning weapons against their wielders. "You're right," she said, her voice calm and clear. "I don't understand how civilized people behave. Could you show me?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Victoria had been expecting anger, defiance, or fear, emotions that could be used to justify whatever came next. Instead, Maya had turned the spotlight back on her accusers, asking them to demonstrate the very behavior they claimed to represent. Maya could see the confusion in Victoria's eyes, the recognition that the script wasn't playing out as planned. But Victoria was committed now, surrounded by her allies and an audience that expected entertainment. "Fine," Victoria said, stepping even closer. "Let me show you how civilized people handle problems." What happened next would be remembered by everyone present, recorded on dozens of phones, and analyzed frame by lawyers and journalists in the days that followed. Victoria raised her hand as if to slap Maya, confident that her target would either cower or retaliate in ways that would justify massive retaliation. But Maya didn't cower, and she didn't retaliate. Instead, she simply stepped aside, letting Victoria's momentum carry her forward into empty space. The movement was so fluid, so effortless, that Victoria stumbled and nearly fell, her designer gown twisting around her legs. The crowd gasped, but not because of violence, because of its complete absence. Maya had demonstrated perfect control, turning Victoria's aggression into a moment of public embarrassment without laying a finger on her. "Thank you for the demonstration," Maya said quietly. "Now I understand." Victoria's face flushed red with humiliation and rage. She'd been made to look foolish in front of everyone who mattered to her, her authority challenged without giving her any justification for retaliation. "You think you're so clever," Victoria hissed. "But this isn't over." "Yes," Maya replied, meeting her eyes with calm certainty. "It is." The silence that followed Maya's words stretched across the ballroom like a held breath. Victoria stood frozen, her face cycling through emotions, humiliation, rage, and something that might have been fear. The crowd of students around them had grown larger, drawn by the promise of drama. But what they'd witnessed wasn't the violent spectacle they'd expected. Maya had transformed the moment into something else entirely. Instead of giving Victoria the confrontation she'd wanted, Maya had exposed the ugliness beneath the veneer of privilege and sophistication. The contrast was stark. Victoria flushed and aggressive in her expensive gown, and Maya, calm and controlled despite being outnumbered and surrounded. "You think this is funny?" Victoria's voice cracked slightly, the first sign that her carefully maintained composure was fracturing. "You think you can humiliate me in front of everyone?" Maya didn't respond immediately. She was watching the crowd, reading faces and body language with the awareness that months of harassment had sharpened. Some students looked uncomfortable, finally seeing the dynamic clearly. Others seemed excited by the possibility of escalating drama. But a few, including Alex, Roberto, and Taylor, were recording everything with their phones, documenting what they knew would be important evidence. "I'm not trying to humiliate anyone," Maya said finally. "I'm just trying to get through my senior year without being attacked." Victoria's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Attacked? You're the one who put 3 people in the hospital. You're the violent one here." "The nurse's office," Maya corrected quietly. "And only after 6 of you cornered me in a parking lot." The murmur that rippled through the crowd suggested that not everyone had heard this version of events. Victoria's narrative had focused on Maya's unprovoked attack, carefully omitting the circumstances that had led to the confrontation. James Caldwell pushed through the crowd, his face red with anger and alcohol. "Don't let her twist this around," he said loudly. "She's dangerous. Look what she did to my ribs." Maya's eyes flicked to James, noting his unsteady movement and aggressive posture. He was drunk, angry, and looking for an excuse to finish what had started in the parking lot. But Maya also noticed something else. Several chaperones were finally moving toward the commotion, alerted by the growing crowd and raised voices. "James, maybe you should," one of his friends started to say. "No," James interrupted, stepping closer to Maya. "I'm tired of walking around school afraid of this psycho. Someone needs to put her in her place." Maya shifted her weight slightly, her body automatically adjusting to face the new threat. But she kept her hands visible and her expression calm, knowing that any aggressive movement would be used against her. "I don't want any trouble," Maya said, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent ballroom. "I just want to be left alone." "Too late for that," Victoria said, emboldened by James's presence in the growing crowd. "You should have thought about that before you showed your true colors." What happened next unfolded with the terrible inevitability of a natural disaster. James lurched forward, his coordination compromised by alcohol but his intent unmistakable. Maya saw the attack coming seconds before it happened, her training allowing her to read the subtle shifts in his posture and balance. But this time, Maya didn't wait for the attack to reach her. As James stumbled forward, she stepped to the side and extended her foot slightly, just enough to catch his ankle. James went down hard, his momentum carrying him into a nearby table laden with refreshments. The crash was spectacular. Crystal glasses shattering, punch bowls overturning, the carefully arranged decorations scattered across the floor. The crowd gasped and stepped back, but Maya was already moving. Victoria had used the distraction to grab a champagne bottle from a nearby table, her face twisted with rage. She swung it toward Maya's head with vicious intent, but Maya ducked under the arc and caught Victoria's wrist in a grip that stopped the attack instantly. For a moment, the 2 girls stood frozen in tableau. Victoria with the bottle raised, Maya's hand locked around her wrist like a steel manacle. Then Maya applied just enough pressure to make Victoria's fingers open involuntarily, and the bottle fell harmlessly to the floor. "Don't," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying a note of warning that made Victoria step back involuntarily. But the confrontation was far from over. Madison and 2 of the older graduates had moved to flank Maya, their intentions clear. They thought they could overwhelm her with numbers, that 3 or 4 attackers would be enough to subdue one girl, no matter how skilled. Maya found herself in the center of a tightening circle, surrounded by hostile faces and raised phones. Part of her mind noted the irony. They were documenting their own criminal behavior, creating evidence that would be used against them. But another part of her mind was calculating distances, assessing threats, and preparing for what she knew was inevitable. The attack came from multiple directions simultaneously. Madison grabbed for Maya's hair while one of the graduates tried to tackle her from behind. The second graduate moved to block her escape route, confident that they had her trapped. But Maya had spent years preparing for exactly this scenario. Master Kim had taught her that real fights weren't like movies. They were chaotic, brutal, and over quickly. The key was to stay calm, control the distance, and use your opponent's aggression against them. Maya ducked under Madison's reaching hands and spun away from the tackle attempt, her movements fluid and economical. She used the graduate's momentum to send him stumbling into Madison, tangling them both. The second graduate found himself facing not a trapped victim, but a skilled fighter whose movements were precise and devastatingly effective. The entire confrontation lasted less than 40 seconds, but when it was over, Maya stood alone in the center of a circle of groaning figures. She wasn't even breathing hard, her expression calm despite the chaos around her. The silence that followed was deafening. Hundreds of students stood frozen, their phones still recording, their expressions ranging from shock to fear to something that might have been respect. Maya looked around the circle of faces, seeing herself clearly reflected in their eyes for the first time. She wasn't the victim anymore. She wasn't the grateful scholarship student who accepted whatever treatment she was given. She was someone who had been pushed too far and had finally pushed back with the full force of her training and determination. "Someone call security." Dr. Hartwell's voice cut through the silence like a blade. The principal stood at the edge of the crowd, her face pale with shock and anger. "I want everyone involved in this incident detained immediately." Maya almost laughed at the word choice. Incident. As if what had just happened was some kind of accident rather than the inevitable result of months of systematic harassment. "Dr. Hartwell," Maya said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom, "I'd like to report an assault. Multiple assaults, actually." The principal's expression hardened. "Miss Chen, you are in serious trouble. This behavior is completely unacceptable." "I agree," Maya replied. "Being attacked by multiple people is completely unacceptable. So is being harassed for months while the administration does nothing to stop it." "That's enough," Dr. Hartwell snapped. "Security will escort you off the premises immediately. You're suspended pending a full investigation." But Maya wasn't finished. She'd learned from Marcus that moments like this were opportunities, chances to speak truth to power when the audience was largest and the stakes were highest. "Investigation of what?" Maya asked. "Of me defending myself? Or of the systematic harassment that led to this moment?" Dr. Hartwell started to respond, but she was interrupted by a new voice from the crowd. "Actually, I think we should investigate both." The speaker was attorney Sarah Martinez, who had just entered the ballroom with two other adults Maya didn't recognize. She was dressed formally, as if she'd been planning to attend the event, but Maya knew her presence wasn't coincidental. "Attorney Martinez, Dr. Ma," Hartwell said, her voice carefully controlled. "What are you doing here?" "Representing my client," Sarah replied, moving to stand beside Maya, "and witnessing what appears to be a clear case of institutional bias in action." Maya felt a surge of gratitude and relief. Sarah's presence changed everything, transforming the situation from a disciplinary matter into a legal one. But she was also curious about how Sarah had known to be here. The answer came from Alex, who pushed through the crowd with her phone in her hand. "I texted her when I saw what was building," Alex said quietly. "I figured you might need backup." Sarah surveyed the scene, the injured students, the broken decorations, the hundreds of witnesses with their phones still recording. "Dr. Hartwell, I hope you're planning to conduct a thorough investigation of this incident. My client has been documenting months of harassment and assault, and what happened here tonight appears to be the culmination of that pattern. Your client attacked multiple students." Dr. Hartwell replied, "We have hundreds of witnesses. We have hundreds of witnesses to my client defending herself against multiple attackers," Sarah corrected. "I trust you'll be reviewing the video evidence carefully before making any decisions about disciplinary action." Maya watched the exchange with fascination. Sarah was using the same techniques that Victoria had employed, controlling the narrative, framing events in terms that supported her position. But unlike Victoria's manipulations, Sarah's version had the advantage of being true. "In fact," Sarah continued, I think this would be an excellent time to discuss the federal investigation that will be opening into this school's handling of harassment and discrimination complaints. The word federal sent a visible shock through the crowd. Dr. Hartwell's face went pale, and Maya could see the calculation in her eyes. This was no longer about managing a disciplinary problem. This was about the survival of the institution itself. That won't be necessary, Dr. Hartwell said quickly. I'm sure we can handle this matter internally. I don't think so, Sarah replied. My client has documented extensive evidence of harassment based on race and socioeconomic status. She's also documented the school's failure to address these complaints when they were brought to your attention. That establishes a pattern of institutional discrimination that requires federal oversight. Maya felt a surge of vindication. For months, she'd been told that her experiences were normal, that she was overreacting, that she should be grateful for the opportunities she'd been given. Now a civil rights attorney was confirming what Maya had known all along. She'd been the victim of systematic discrimination enabled by institutional policies. But the real surprise came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the psychiatrist who had conducted Maya's evaluation, stepped forward from the crowd. Dr. Hartwell, Dr. Morrison said, I believe you received my report recommending that this school conduct a full investigation into the harassment Miss Chen has been experiencing. Have you acted on that recommendation? Dr. Hartwell's expression shifted from anger to something approaching panic. Dr. Morrison, this isn't the appropriate venue for... On the contrary, Dr. Morrison interrupted. This is exactly the appropriate venue. What I witnessed tonight was the predictable result of institutional negligence. Miss Chen has been systematically harassed for months, and instead of addressing the problem, this school has chosen to blame the victim. The crowd around them had grown silent, sensing that they were witnessing something historic. Students who had never questioned the social order of Westbridge Academy were seeing it challenged by adults with real authority and expertise. Maya realized that this moment had been building for months, that every incident, every humiliation, every failure of the system had led to this confrontation. But now, for the first time, she wasn't facing it alone. Furthermore, Dr. Morrison continued, I'm prepared to testify that Miss Chen's actions tonight were consistent with someone who has been systematically traumatized by months of harassment. Her response was measured, controlled, and entirely appropriate given the circumstances. Sarah smiled, recognizing a powerful ally. Dr. Morrison, would you be willing to provide expert testimony about the psychological effects of the harassment Miss Chen has experienced? Absolutely, Dr. Morrison replied. In fact, I've been documenting similar patterns at several elite private schools in this region. What's happening here isn't isolated, it's systematic. Maya watched the exchange with growing amazement. The network of support that she hadn't known existed was revealing itself, piece by piece. These adults had been watching, documenting, and preparing for exactly this moment. The final revelation came from Marcus Johnson, who appeared at the edge of the crowd with a small recording device in his hand. I've been documenting conversations with affected students for the past several months, Marcus announced. With their permission, of course. What I've found is a clear pattern of harassment designed to force out students who don't fit the expected demographic profile. Dr. Hartwell looked around the ballroom, suddenly understanding that she was surrounded by people who had been building a case against her school for months. The isolated incident she'd thought she was managing had revealed itself to be part of a much larger investigation. This is highly irregular, Dr. Hartwell said weakly. What's irregular, Sarah replied, is a school that allows systematic harassment to continue unchecked until a student is forced to defend herself physically. Maya felt the shift in the room's atmosphere. The students who had come expecting entertainment were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something much more significant, the exposure of a system that many of them had never questioned. Some of the students looked uncomfortable, perhaps recognizing their own complicity in what had happened. Others seemed genuinely shocked, as if they were seeing the social dynamics of their school clearly for the first time. But a few, particularly those who had also experienced marginalization, looked vindicated, finally seeing their own experiences validated by adult authority figures. Taylor Brooks stepped forward, her phone in her hand. I have recordings of multiple harassment incidents, she announced. I've been documenting everything since the beginning of the school year. Her statement opened floodgates. Students began stepping forward with their own evidence, screenshots, recordings, witness accounts of incidents they'd observed or experienced. Maya realized that the network of documentation was far larger than she'd imagined, that dozens of students had been quietly collecting evidence of the harassment that pervaded their school. "This is exactly what we need," Sarah said, addressing the growing group of student witnesses. "Each piece of evidence helps establish the pattern of institutional negligence that allowed this situation to develop." Dr. Hartwell made one last attempt to regain control. "I think we should continue this discussion in a more appropriate setting. Perhaps—" "No," Maya said, her voice cutting through the principal's words with quiet authority. "We've tried private discussions. We've tried working within the system. It's time for transparency." Maya looked around the ballroom at the hundreds of students who were still recording, still watching, still processing what they'd witnessed. This was her moment, not just to defend herself, but to speak for every student who had been marginalized, harassed, or silenced. "For 18 months I've tried to fit in here," Maya said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "I've tried to be grateful for opportunities that came at the cost of my dignity. I've tried to ignore harassment that would be considered criminal if it happened anywhere else." She paused, meeting the eyes of students throughout the crowd. Some looked away, uncomfortable with her directness. Others leaned forward, hanging on her words. "I came to Westbridge Academy because I believed in education, in the possibility that talent and hard work could overcome the circumstances of your birth. What I learned instead was that some institutions are designed to maintain inequality, not eliminate it." Dr. Hartwell started to object, but Sarah silenced her with a gesture. "Tonight, you saw me defend myself against multiple attackers," Maya continued. "But what you didn't see were the months of harassment that led to this moment. The systematic exclusion, the daily humiliations, the institutional indifference that enabled it all." Maya's voice grew stronger as she spoke, months of suppressed anger and frustration finally finding expression. "You didn't see the teachers who ignored obvious harassment because it was easier than confronting popular students. You didn't see the administrators who blamed victims rather than addressing the behavior of their attackers. You didn't see the system that protects privilege at the expense of justice." The silence in the ballroom was complete now, broken only by the soft sounds of phones recording and the distant noise of traffic outside. "But now you know," Maya said, looking directly at Dr. Hartwell. "Now everyone knows. And the choice you make next will determine whether this institution deserves to survive." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Maya could see their impact rippling through the crowd. Students who had never questioned the social order of their school were being forced to confront uncomfortable truths about the system they'd benefited from. Sarah stepped forward, her expression serious but satisfied. "Dr. Hartwell, I think it's time we discuss the terms of a settlement that will prevent this matter from going to federal court." "Settlement?" Dr. Hartwell's voice was barely a whisper. "My client has been the victim of systematic harassment enabled by institutional negligence," Sarah explained. "She's suffered educational interference, emotional distress, and civil rights violations. The evidence is overwhelming, and the publicity will be devastating." Maya watched the principal's face as the full scope of the situation became clear. This wasn't just about disciplinary action anymore. It was about the survival of Westbridge Academy itself. What do you want?" Dr. Hartwell asked. "Accountability," Maya replied before Sarah could answer. "Real change. Policies that protect students instead of protecting the institution's reputation." Sarah nodded approvingly. "My client wants to ensure that no other student experiences what she's endured. That means comprehensive policy reforms, mandatory training for faculty and staff, and ongoing oversight to ensure compliance, and consequences for the students who have been perpetrating this harassment," Dr. Morrison added. "Therapeutic intervention, community service, and clear accountability measures." Maya looked at Victoria, who was still sitting on the floor where she'd fallen, her designer gown stained and torn. For a moment, Maya felt something that might have been pity. Victoria was a product of her environment, raised to believe that her status gave her the right to treat others as inferior. But that didn't excuse her behavior, and it didn't eliminate the need for consequences. "What about criminal charges?" asked one of the students in the crowd. Sarah considered the question. "That's up to the district attorney's office. But given the video evidence of tonight's assault and the documented pattern of harassment that preceded it, I think criminal charges are very likely." The reality of potential criminal prosecution sent another shock through the crowd. Many of these students had never faced real consequences for their actions, protected by family wealth and institutional indifference. The possibility of criminal records was a wake-up call that reverberated through the ballroom. Over the next hour, as security and police arrived to sort through the chaos, Maya found herself at the center of a transformation she'd never imagined possible. The documentation that she and her allies had collected was being reviewed by law enforcement officials. Student witnesses were giving statements. The incident was being investigated not as a disciplinary matter, but as a criminal case. The local media arrived shortly after the police, drawn by reports of a riot at the exclusive academy. But the story they found was far more complex and compelling than a simple fight between teenagers. This appears to be a case of systematic harassment finally reaching a breaking point, reported Linda Chen, again no relation, from Channel 7 News. Multiple students have come forward with evidence of a pattern of discrimination and abuse that school officials allegedly ignored for months. Maya watched the news reports from the principal's office, where she sat with Sarah, Dr. Morrison, and Marcus while police finished their investigation. The story was spreading beyond the local news, picked up by regional and national outlets interested in issues of discrimination at elite private schools. "This is exactly what we hoped for," Marcus said, watching a CNN reporter interview Taylor Brooks about her decision to document the harassment. "National attention means national accountability." Sarah nodded, but her expression was serious. "Maya, you need to understand that this is just the beginning. The legal process will take months, possibly years. There will be depositions, hearings, and intense scrutiny of everything you've experienced." "I understand," Maya replied. "But if it prevents other students from going through what I've experienced, it's worth it." Dr. Morrison leaned forward. "Maya, I want you to know that what you did tonight took incredible courage. You stood up, not just for yourself, but for every student who has been marginalized in institutions like this." Maya felt a surge of emotion that she'd been suppressing throughout the evening. For months, she'd felt isolated and powerless, convinced that she was fighting a battle she couldn't win. Now, surrounded by adults who understood and supported her struggle, she finally felt the validation she'd been seeking. The immediate aftermath of the formal incident moved quickly. Victoria, James, Madison, and the 2 graduates who had participated in the attack were arrested and charged with assault. The video evidence was so clear that their attorneys immediately began discussing plea bargains. More importantly, the federal investigation that Sarah had threatened became a reality. The Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights opened a formal investigation into Westbridge Academy's handling of harassment and discrimination complaints. The school's accreditation was placed under review, and its federal funding was frozen pending the outcome of the investigation. Dr. Hartwell resigned within a week, followed by several other administrators who had been complicit in the systematic negligence that had enabled the harassment. The Board of Trustees hired an interim principal with a background in civil rights education and a mandate to implement comprehensive reforms. The changes at Westbridge Academy were swift and dramatic. New policies were implemented that required immediate investigation of all harassment complaints. Mandatory training was instituted for faculty, staff, and students on issues of discrimination and bias. A student ombudsman position was created to ensure that complaints were handled fairly and transparently. But the most significant change was cultural. The incident at the winter formal had shattered the unspoken agreements that had governed social interactions at the school. Students who had previously felt powerless to speak out against harassment now understood that their voices would be heard and their experiences validated. Maya returned to school after a week of media attention and legal consultations to find an environment that was fundamentally different from the one she'd left. Students who had previously ignored her now approached with apologies and expressions of support. Teachers who had been indifferent to her struggles now went out of their way to ensure she felt welcome and valued. The transformation wasn't universal, of course. Some students and families resented the changes, viewing them as political correctness run amok. Several families transferred their children to other schools, unwilling to accept an environment where privilege couldn't be used as a weapon against those deemed inferior. But for Maya, the changes represented something she'd never thought possible: the hope that institutions could actually live up to their stated values of fairness and equality. The legal resolution came faster than anyone had expected. Faced with overwhelming evidence and devastating publicity, Westbridge Academy agreed to a comprehensive settlement that included financial compensation for Maya and a detailed consent decree requiring ongoing reforms and federal oversight. Victoria and her co-conspirators pled guilty to assault charges and were sentenced to community service, anger management counseling, and probation. More importantly, they were required to participate in restorative justice programs that brought them face to face with the students they had harmed. Maya attended one of these sessions, curious to see how her former tormentors would handle being held accountable for their actions. Victoria was subdued, her usual confidence replaced by something that might have been genuine remorse. "I never thought about how my behavior affected other people," Victoria said during the session. "I was raised to believe that some people were just better than others. I know that's wrong now, but it took losing everything to understand it." Maya studied her former antagonist, recognizing something in Victoria's expression that reminded her of her own journey. "Understanding is just the first step," Maya replied. "The real work is changing the systems that taught you to think that way." Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I want to do that work. I want to make sure this never happens to anyone else." The restorative justice process wasn't easy for anyone involved, but it represented something unprecedented at Westbridge Academy, actual accountability for behavior that had previously been ignored or excused. As Maya's senior year drew to a close, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. She'd entered Westbridge Academy as a grateful scholarship student, willing to accept whatever treatment was necessary to access elite education. She was graduating as someone who had fundamentally changed the institution itself. The graduation ceremony was unlike any in the school's history. Instead of the usual speeches about tradition and excellence, the valedictorian, Alex Chen, who had been inspired by Maya's courage to excel academically, spoke about justice, accountability, and the responsibility of privilege. "We are graduating from an institution that has been forced to confront its own failures," Alex said, looking out at an audience that included students, families, faculty, and media representatives. "But we are also graduating with the knowledge that change is possible when people have the courage to demand it." Maya sat in the front row, wearing her cap and gown with pride. She'd earned her place at this ceremony not just through academic achievement, but through a kind of moral courage that had transformed everyone around her. When her name was called, Maya walked across the stage to thunderous applause, but the recognition that meant the most came from Dr. Morrison, who had been invited to present a special award for courage and advocacy. "Maya Chen has demonstrated that real strength isn't the ability to endure injustice," Dr. Morrison said as she handed Maya the award. "Real strength is the courage to fight back against systems of oppression, even when the odds seem impossible." Maya accepted the award with grace, but her mind was already focused on the future. She'd been accepted to several prestigious universities, with full scholarships that recognized both her academic achievements and her advocacy work. But more importantly, she'd been contacted by civil rights organizations interested in her continued involvement in educational justice issues. The final surprise came during the reception after graduation. Master Kim, her original martial arts instructor, appeared at her side with a gentle smile. "I heard about what happened," he said quietly. "I'm proud of you for using your training wisely." Maya felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I tried to remember what you taught me about patience and control." "You did more than that," Master Kim replied. "You remembered that the ultimate goal of martial arts isn't to fight. It's to create a world where fighting isn't necessary." As the evening wound down and families began to leave, Maya found herself standing in the parking lot where everything had started. The space looked different now, smaller somehow, less intimidating. But Maya knew that the real change wasn't in the physical environment. It was in her understanding of her own power and responsibility. Sarah Martinez approached as Maya was getting ready to leave. "I wanted to let you know that 3 other schools have reached out about implementing similar reforms," Sarah said. "Your case has become a model for how to address systematic harassment in educational settings." Maya smiled, feeling a sense of satisfaction that went beyond personal vindication. "Good. That's what this was always about, making sure other students don't have to go through what I experienced." "There's something else," Sarah continued. "The Department of Education has asked if you'd be interested in consulting on a national initiative to address discrimination in elite private schools. It would mean traveling, speaking at conferences, helping to develop policy recommendations." Maya considered the offer, understanding its significance. She'd have the opportunity to turn her personal experience into systematic change, to ensure that her struggle had meaning beyond her own situation. "I'm interested," Maya said, "but I want to make sure we're focusing on real solutions, not just symbolic gestures." Sarah laughed. "I wouldn't expect anything less from you." As Maya drove home that night, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She'd arrived at Westbridge Academy as a quiet girl who believed that acceptance required silence, that belonging meant tolerating injustice. She was leaving as someone who understood that true belonging could only exist in communities built on fairness and mutual respect. The harassment she'd endured had been terrible, but it had also revealed strengths she hadn't known she possessed. More importantly, it had taught her that individual courage could inspire collective action, that one person's refusal to accept injustice could catalyze changes that benefited everyone. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Alex. "Did you see the news? 2 more schools just announced comprehensive anti-harassment initiatives. You started something that's spreading everywhere." Maya smiled, understanding that her story was far from over. The battle she'd fought at Westbridge Academy was just the beginning of a larger campaign for justice in educational institutions across the country. But for the first time in months, Maya felt hopeful about the future. Not just her own, but the future of every student who would benefit from the changes she'd helped create. The girl who had once sat alone in the cafeteria, trying to make herself invisible, had discovered that true strength came not from hiding, but from standing up and demanding that the world be better than it was. And in the process, she'd learned that sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice wasn't physical strength or martial arts training. It was the courage to speak truth to power and the determination to keep fighting until justice prevailed. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please like the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.